That was a picture of Clementine Wamaria, a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. As a Yale student who hadn't gone to school until the 6th grade, no one would suspect her memories to be a realm of horrors of the 20th century. Less than 2 decades ago in 1994, Clementine survived a mass murder at age 6 when she ran for her life with her 16-year-old sister. Like many other children in the midst of the genocide, Clementine didn't know what death meant or what was happening. The sounds of screams and hacking of bodies outside her room were just everyday noises. She managed to survive and was reunited with her family 12 years later when she won an essay contest sponsored by Oprah. 800,000 other people were not so lucky. Some of you are probably wondering, what the heck is the Rwandan genocide? In a nutshell, in 1994, the government of Rwanda called on everyone in the Hutu majority to kill everyone in the Tutsi minority, and over 3 months, 800,000 Tutsis were murdered. I read the book We Wish to Inform You That Tomorrow We Will Be Killed with Our Families, written by Philip Gorovich, which consisted of short stories from Rwanda. The author wrote about his visit to Bukavu, currently the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He wrote, "In the giant market of a refugee camp that was home to many Rwandan Hutu militiamen, I had watched a man butchering a cow with a machete. He was quite expert at his work, taking big, precise strokes that made a sharp hacking noise. The rallying cry to the killers during the genocide was, 'Do your work,' and I saw that it was work, this butchery. It was hard work. It took many hacks, 2, 3, 4, 5 hard hacks to chop through the cow's leg. How many hacks to dismember a person?" This was quite the graphic analogy, but an analogy nonetheless to the genocide. The only difference being the cow was probably already dead. A more merciful end compared to the Tutsi minority. Every Rwandan Gorovich spoke to had a favorite question with no answer, most of them being, how had so many Tutsis allowed themselves to be killed, or how many Hutus allowed themselves to kill? This genocide is just another example of human violence. My question is, what is the real driving force behind human violence? Gorovich spoke with a man named Nkurunziza. The man said, those who were paid or forced to kill were looking up to the people of higher socioeconomic standing to see how to behave. I would have to disagree with the saying. How forced were the killers really? Think of it this way. A child looks up to their role models, the parents. But if, for example, the child is completely uninterested in toys, the parent can run around Toys R Us for hours bombarding the child with toys, but to no avail. If the peasants didn't have a natural murderous instinct, the people of higher socioeconomic standing should not have been able to force them into murdering. Having a child uninterested in toys is a rarity, like being a human without a natural bloodlust. Humanity's natural bloodlust gets dulled down as society becomes more civilized and more actions become considered unacceptable. Every single person is capable of committing these crimes, but what's stopping us? The law, society, civilization. If we take away civilization, our tamed, caged, bloodthirsty, natural, violent instinct would be set loose and we would be the savages we actually are. These acts of human violence are simply breaches of our self-prison. 1994 was the year I, as well as many of my peers, were born. While our parents celebrated the miracle of life, millions experienced firsthand the reality of human cruelty, and of the 6 billion people of the time, how many people were aware of this tragedy? Genocide is a topic people of first world countries believe themselves to be unable to sympathize with. I was born into a relatively peaceful and prosperous country, so of course when I hear of such stories, I can only cringe. I believe I can never truly understand what these people have gone through, and that's true. However, that doesn't mean I can't relate. We see aspects of human violence on a daily basis. We just overlook them because these actions are relatively mild. We see evidence of bloodlust every day. In our society, bullying, hazing, and school massacres exist. 15-year-old Phoebe Prince hung herself from a stairway January 2010 after undergoing 3 months of severe taunting and physical threats from a cluster of students at her high school. She was called an Irish slut, had her books knocked out of her hands, and received threatening messages day after day. The bullies responsible gained nothing from her misery but their senseless satisfaction of seeing her suffer. I read an article on Daily News describing this man's first-hand experience with college fraternity hazing. Pledges were made to drink 15 cups of beer in a short amount of time and then gorge it out, eat vomit omelets, chug cups of vinegar, drink a gallon of whole milk in less than an hour. They were pelted with mashed potatoes and then they were forced to gnaw the heads off of fish. Pledges have died of alcohol poisoning, and students were found duct-taped in frat basements with their bodies covered in red welts, evidence of unlawful violence. They were not forced because they were able to quit at any time. Every day we have people subjecting themselves to mental and physical torture. How did they allow it? Human violence is like a double-edged sword. If you can dish it, you can take it. There have been plenty of incidences where children were caught bringing weapons to school. Columbine was a small-scale genocide conducted by two teens who merely wanted to see people drop dead. And who did they want to kill? Everyone, including friends. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold weren't loners and they hadn't been bullied. They were not ordinary kids who were bullied into retaliation or played too much video games. They just wanted to be famous. On the day of the shooting, Harris's shirt read Natural Selection. He seemed to feel superior to everyone else, and life was just a game of survival of the fittest. He once said, "I felt like a god, and I wish I was, having everyone being officially lower than me. They killed because it made them feel good." It's proven more effective to prevent a problem than to try and stop it in its tracks. How do we solve a problem? We try to nip it in the buds. What happens when people are unable to suppress and control our bloodthirsty instincts at a young age? We end up with child murderers. At 13, Eric Smith murdered 4-year-old Derek Roby. Derek had been strangled, had large rocks dropped in his head, and was sodomized with a stick. Smith was diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder, a condition in which a person cannot control inner rage. When he was asked why he did it, he couldn't give a definite answer. George Stinney, at 14, was the youngest person to be executed in the States during the 20th century. He was convicted of the murder of 2 girls, 11 and 8 years old. Both were found in a muddy hole with fractures in their skulls, inflicted by a railroad spike. He said he wanted to have sex with the girls, but instead ended up killing them. Only when he was asked to rise and be sentenced did he appear slightly excited. Graham Young became fascinated with chemistry, particularly poisons and their effects on people, and at 14 he had the expertise of a postgraduate chemistry student, all self-learned through library books. His victims were friends and family. Even in a maximum security hospital, he managed to poison staff and fellow inmates. After he was released, he continued to poison co-workers, and so he was sent back to prison where he eventually died. His other great interest was idolizing murderers such as Hitler. Mary Bell lived a less than adequate life. Her father was a habitual criminal and her mother was a prostitute who had forced her to engage in sexual acts with her clients since age 4. At 11, she was convicted of murder while her mother repeatedly sold her story to the press. Mary said, "Murder isn't that bad. We all die sometime anyway." To her, inflicting death was just as natural as giving birth. Relating back to hazing, human violence works both ways. For some people, instead of feeling the need to inflict violence, they would rather receive it. Adrian Exley was wrapped tightly in heavy plastic and then bound with duct tape. He had a leather hood placed over his head with a thin plastic straw inserted so he could breathe. He was shut up in a closet where he suffocated. This was the way Exley liked it. However, his death was unanticipated by himself and his torturer. Exley had traveled from Britain to Massachusetts for a 3-day bondage and discipline session with a man he met through a sadomasochism website. These were 2 consenting adults who knew what they were doing. Even people who do not physically carry out these unlawful criminal acts themselves can be guilty of such crimes. Why do people gossip and why do we have bystanders? People gossip about things that have nothing to do with them just to add fuel to the fire and watch drama unfold. Bystanders do nothing but watch as events unravel in front of their eyes. In a sense, people gain satisfaction in watching acts of violence, sadistic or not. In Phoebe Prince's case, some teachers, administrators, and other staff members at the school were aware of the harassment but did not stop it, eventually leading to her suicide. I personally am terrified of horror movies, but I love to watch it anyways, knowing I would regret it later. I love the thrill of being scared. Human behavior is people's motivation to pursue pleasure, so it seems counterintuitive that people would voluntarily immerse themselves in almost 2 hours of fear, disgust, and terror. That feeling you get when you watch these movies isn't actually fear, it's excitement. We willingly endure terror in order to enjoy a euphoric sense of relief at the end. In a way, violent media is a way of satisfying our human need for violence and suppressing our natural aggression. People seem to reach almost a euphoric satisfaction when they hold a position of power. Just recently, there was the Kony hype. Joseph Kony has been building an army of child killers and sex slaves simply because he can. He has no real purpose other than exercising his power over these children. Family physician Harold Shipman left at least 215 patients dead in his killing spree that lasted more than 2 decades. He was obsessed with causing death and he came to enjoy exercising the ultimate power, that of life and death. He had shown symptoms of a classic necrophiliac, someone who received gratification in the act of inducing death, and his need for control gave him a perverted pleasure from causing death. When these natural instinctive feelings escape from civilization's imprisonment, the person experiences unexplainable pleasure from inducing violence. The most scarring story I've ever heard is the story of Junko Furuta, who underwent over 44 days of torture. This young Japanese girl at the time was kidnapped by a group of boys and was forced to call her parents and tell them she ran away. She was starved, malnutritioned, and fed with cockroaches and urine. She was forced to strip in front of the boys and was burned with cigarettes and other foreign objects. As well, foreign objects were also inserted into her. She was raped over 400 times. Furuta would have had her hands tied to the ceilings and was used as a punching bag as well as beaten with bamboo sticks. She had flammable liquid poured all over her legs and feet and was set on fire. She was sodomized with fireworks, which were then lit, and she was beaten with golf clubs and iron rods continuously, and amongst the foreign objects that were forced inside of her, there were skewers and scissors. Her torture didn't end there. She also had hot wax poured over her face, and her eyelids were severely burned. She was stabbed with sewing needles in the chest, and her eardrums were harshly destroyed. Now you're probably thinking, what kind of sick person would do such a thing? But the answer is right there in front of you. A person, a human being. To reach a deeper understanding of human violence, I read Human Aggression, Theories, Research and Implications for Social Policy by Russell Gein, Animal and Human Aggression by Pierre Carli, and Extraordinary Evil, A Brief History of Genocide by Barbara Coloroso. Gein wrote that young children do not have well-defined or stable normative beliefs about the appropriateness of aggression like older children, and those beliefs affect how they respond to everyday stimuli. This explains why children show more violent tendencies and lack of self-control than adults. He also wrote that aggressive individuals often do not expect their own aggressive behavior to have bad consequences for them. They do not expect consequences because following natural instincts is not a crime. It's like punishing birds for flying. Carli wrote that there are cases where aggression seems to be spontaneous, as it is displayed in the absence of any event or situation which might have provoked it, and it is the means for seeking stimulation, excitement, or thrills. So in other words, aggression happens naturally without any stimuli as a ways of entertaining oneself. In her book Extraordinary Evil, A Brief History of Genocide, Barbara Coloroso wrote that the more ordinary people perform such tasks, such as hacking someone to death, the more they become socialized to the atrocity, the more the atrocity becomes normalized, made ordinary. Thus, it becomes all in a day's work, to take out to sea a few hundred people and throw them overboard to drown, shove a few thousand people into the gas chambers, and then shove them into the crematorium, hack to death with machetes a few more thousand Tutsis. Coloroso conceded that genocide is not outside the realm of ordinary human behavior. If atrocities can become normalized, then the reverse can certainly also happen. Humanity's natural bloodlust gets dulled down as society becomes more civilized and more actions become considered unacceptable. Polish-Jewish lawyer, author, and scholar Raphael Lemkin commented that genocide was a crime against humanity. Taking a gander back at genocide, such as the Rwandan genocide, the Holocaust, and the Armenian genocide, what it really is just a bunch of people killing other people simply to fulfill their desire to see blood spill. So is genocide really a crime against humanity, or is it just humanity?